Komori. Komori helped Atsumu stand up straight with Atsumu contorting his face in pain. Shit, Komori's kick was hard. You couldn't have kicked any harder, could you? Atsumu interjected sarcastically and grinned mischievously with some pained expression at Komori. Komori raised his eyebrows and looked apologetically at Atsumu. You idiot, why did you take off the headset? Atsumu propped his arms on his thighs and tried to breathe away his pain at least a little. He scoffed. Before he could say anything he felt a hand brush his back. He looked up and caught the worried look on Yachi's face. Sorry, I'm responsible for that. I had to make sure no one was eavesdropping on us. What makes you think so? Saki's people already managed to hack into your frequency once when they lured you to me. The day Komori had seen Yachi for the first time and she had talked about Saki. The day Komori had followed her and suddenly lost connection with Sakusa. The day Komori almost died, suddenly it all made sense. Komori's face turned pale. He let out a short and mocking sigh and scowled at Yachi. Had. No wonder our connection broke off then. Atsumu now straightened up completely and looked at Komori worriedly. Why did you break in here like that? Normal people use the bell, Komori. First of all, I'm not an ordinary guy. Secondly, 2 men were on their way to your house. I would have told you, but... Komori tapped twice on the headset in his ear. No connection. Atsumu's eyes widened, he felt guilty. He bent down to pick up the knife Komori had slapped out of his hand and then grabbed Yachi's hand. Does that mean we should get out of here? Better if we go, I don't know how many more will come. Okay. Yachi, you'll come with us for now. She looked at Atsumu, perplexed and quite intimidated. Yachi understood that she shouldn't be alone in case Saki was also after her by now, but she was worried. What about Kuru? Atsumu paused for a moment, thinking. He glanced at Komori and gave him a questioning look. Do you think Aiko can provide some men for Yachi and her boyfriend? I'll explain later, but we should get them out of Saki's way. Yes, this shouldn't be a problem. I'll call her later. Good. Atsumu turned to Yachi and gave her a warm smile. Don't worry, we'll get it sorted out. She frowned but nodded. Yachi knew she could trust Atsumu and put all her hopes that everything would end soon into his hands. The 3 left Yachi's home and walked past 2 men lying on the floor near her apartment. Yachi flinched at the sight, panic and fear written all over her face. Are they unconscious? I wouldn't kill people in a place like this. Komori had shot them unconscious with a narcotic before they could reach Atsumu and Yachi. If he hadn't been there, the whole thing probably would have ended badly. Atsumu knew that and was therefore only even more grateful to Komori. While Sakusa always settled everything in the moment, devoted himself to the things that were just about to happen and also settled them with the great confidence that he has in himself, Komori, if possible, never let it get that far in the first place. Any danger that could be avoided should be avoided, and if you didn't have to be around to do it, that was even better. Komori wasn't a bad hand-to-hand fighter, but he was the best at handling weapons from a distance. You could really call Komori the head. Thanks to him they all knew they would make it home safely. Atsumu could understand why Aiko's father had chosen the cousins to protect his daughter. With Sakusa at her side and Komori watching their backs, nothing could really happen to her. They were both so good at what they did that it was almost scary. When the 3 of them reached the apartment complex of Atsumu and Komori, Yachi once again explained the whole situation to Komori and sincerely apologized to him for everything that had happened so far because of her. Komori just smiled it off, for him it was really no big deal. He passed the information on to Aiko and immediately ordered a few men to protect Yachi and Kuru. Until they arrived, Atsumu and Komori took care of them and made sure nothing would happen to them. After a few days, the men arrived and took over that job. The two boys said their goodbyes to Yachi and thanked her again for all the information. Especially Komori was sure that they would get Seiki soon now, which made Atsumu extremely positive. Once Seiki was defeated, the danger would finally be over and they could all live somewhat normally. The two headed back home to join Aiko and Sakusa in preparing for what they hoped would be their final battle against Seiki. Komori and Atsumu had already completed an 8-hour drive and were now almost back at Aiko's house. Even on the way back, Atsumu remained rather silent. He pondered even more than usual. On the one hand, he lost his thoughts about the whole situation with Seiki and Yachi. He had to think about everything that was happening lately because of it. On the other hand, he felt really sick at the thought of standing in front of Sakusa again at any moment. He didn't really understand it himself, but he just didn't have a good feeling about seeing him again. Maybe it was the fear that Sakusa would reject him again, or the fear that the friendship for which especially Atsumu had fought so hard was destroyed. No matter what it was, Atsumu was nervous. He frowned and bit his lips, his knee trembling, which made Komori, who was driving, keep glancing over. "Atsumu, are you okay?" "Huh?" Atsumu looked at Komori, absorbed in his thoughts. "Ah yes. Sorry, I don't have my brain with me." Komori pressed his lips together and frowned. "Yachi and her boyfriend are safe, don't worry." Atsumu hummed in confirmation and looked sideways out the window again. "What else is bothering you?" Atsumu winced briefly, then sighed. Maybe he was just worrying too much. Or maybe Sakusa was just really busy and hadn't even written to Komori. Yes, that might be it. Atsumu decided to ask Komori. "Hey, have you had any contact with Omi lately?" Yes, he actually informed me every day how the situation was with them down there." "What?" "Oh. Just curious." Atsumu sighed and looked outside again. Komori raised his eyebrows and frowned. "Did you guys fight again before we left? You've been so quiet all this time, has it something to do with Kyo?" Atsumu grabbed the bridge of his nose, pulled his eyebrows together, and closed his eyes. Komori knew his cousin well, maybe he should just talk to him about his concerns, after all he trusted Komori a lot. "Hey Atsumu, what's going on?" Komori now kept looking over at Atsumu with concern. He sighed. "Omi kissed me just before we left." He did what?" Komori, please concentrate on the road." After Komori tore his gaze to Atsumu and almost ran off the road, he looked back at it in front of him to make sure the two of them didn't crash. Fortunately, it was already evening and quite dark, so there was hardly any traffic. Komori chuckled sheepishly and couldn't quite believe what Atsumu had just told him. "Oh man, he really opened up to you, huh?" Atsumu frowned but remained silent. He turned his head again to look out sideways from the car. "Oh, and you didn't return the kiss?" Atsumu immediately turned his head back to Komori and looked at him, horrified and a little affected. He immediately contradicted him. "What? No, it's not like that. We both wanted it, and for days now I can't think of anything else." "Then why such a face? Don't you feel the same for him as he does for you?" Atsumu winced. "That's the thing." He put his hands on his thighs and clutched his pants tightly with his fingers, trying to somehow calm himself down again. His gaze was fixed on his fists. "I don't know at all how Omi feels about me." Atsumu spoke softly, as if he hardly wanted to say the words because he was afraid that the answer would hurt him too much. Komori looked from the corner of his eyes at Atsumu, his expression again quite neutral. Atsumu chuckled nervously. "One moment he's kissing me and the next he's giving me the cold shoulder and hasn't contacted me since then." Atsumu looked at Komori, his expression almost filled with pain. "What if he realized that I am like Yuki after all?" Komori's eyes widened, he winced briefly. Atsumu slapped his palms on his forehead and kept his eyes wide open. The uneasy feeling in his stomach spread all over his body. I am so ridiculous, how could I hope that he would see me in the same way that I see him? How could I think that Omi hates Atsumu? Komori interrupted Atsumu calmly, his face not turned from the road though. Stop comparing yourself to Yuki, you're nothing like him. Atsumu turned his gaze back to Komori, looking at him in horror and confusion. Komori chuckled. Let me put it romantically, if Yuki is Kiyo's moonlight, then you are his sunbeams. Yuki helped Kiyo out of his darkest days. Honestly, when his parents died it was a shock to everyone, and I've actually never seen Kiyo as messed up as he was then. With Yuki he found a way back into life, but at the same time Yuki always reminded him how alone he was. They shared the same fate. I'm honestly not even sure if they really loved each other or just carried each other through life. Atsumu's eyes widened. The words were harsh. After everything Sakusa had told Atsumu about Yuki, Atsumu was actually pretty sure that Sakusa had loved him. Very much, in fact. Please don't take this the wrong way, I liked Yuki a lot and I was really grateful to him for giving Kiyo some sort of life energy again. But there was always something about him that never really allowed the two of them to flourish. As if when they were together they would rather pull each other down again. Atsumu remembered Sakusa's words. He had told him something similar. When I heard that Yuki had betrayed all of us and Aiko's father had to shoot him, I wasn't quite as shocked as the rest. That sounds cruel, doesn't it? Atsumu looked at Komori with some despair. His lips were trembling. Of course I was sad, after all Yuki had been a good friend anyway. But there was always something negative about him, I noticed it from the beginning. And when I talked to Kiyo about it, I wasn't very surprised. He mourned him, isolated himself from us a bit and had his mood swings. Of course, all that took a toll on him, but you know what I noticed then? Besides all the pain and sadness in his eyes, you could see this one other emotion. Atsumu's heart was beating strongly. He frowned and looked at Komori sharply, his lips open a crack and he let slow deep breaths pass over them, captivated by what Komori was telling him. What? Komori let a small chuckle escape his lips. He took a deep breath and collected himself. Relief. Atsumu's eyes widened again, he closed his lips. Shock was written all over his face. Komori let another small smile escape his lips. Yuki saved Kiyo, but also pulled him back down at the same time. He is his moonlight, because they both never escaped from the darkness that surrounded their souls. You on the other hand. Komori turned to Atsumu for a brief moment and gave him a toothy wide grin. Atsumu's heart stopped for a moment. You make him bloom, Atsumu. You drive everything negative and dark out of him and light his way with your warm, funny, and carefree nature. I've actually never seen Kiyo like this before. Atsumu blushed, not knowing what to say at all, he was so overwhelmed by Komori's speech. Don't be put off by his attitude. Kiyo carries deep wounds inside himself, of course he is afraid to fall in love with you, afraid to be hurt again himself. He will probably also reject you again and try to keep you at a distance, when this idiot actually wants the opposite. Komori chuckled to himself and then exhaled deeply. I'm not asking you to have to endure all this. In the end, you have to be fine yourself, you shouldn't suffer. I don't know if it's going to be worth it either, Atsumu, but... He looked at Atsumu hopefully and smiled. If you really love him, don't give up so easily. And most of all, stop comparing yourself to Yuki. Atsumu kept his eyes wide open. His heart was beating so hard and racing so fast that he felt like it would jump out of his chest at any moment. He had to process everything Komori had told him, but finally managed to let a small, embarrassed smile cross his lips. Meanwhile, his gaze was lowered and a few strands of hair fell into his face. Atsumu took a deep breath and now looked Komori confidently in the face. Thank you, Komori. Komori gave him a big grin back. I actually needed to hear that. When the two finally arrived, they were greeted by an excited Aiko. She hugged them for what felt like hours and never let them out of her sight. They unpacked their things and then met back in the living room to talk about their trip and the news. Komori did the talking, as Atsumu was still feeling a bit down, even if he didn't necessarily show it to the others. Meanwhile, his and Sakusa's gazes kept meeting, causing them both to blush again and again. Atsumu's heart was racing. Seeing Sakusa, he wanted to taste more of the kiss that was given to him just before he left. Atsumu's eyes were literally glued to Sakusa. He admired his obsidian eyes, the long curved eyelashes, his moles above his eyebrow, the one perfect curl that fell into his face, his edgy face, the cheekbones that led to his lips, his soft peachy lips. God, what he would give to kiss him now. Atsumu spaced out, his gaze fixed on Sakusa as if in a trance. His whole appearance literally drew him in. His attention only returned to Komori when he uttered the following words. Since we're going to meet Seiki in about 2 weeks, we should train even harder until that time. Handling weapons shouldn't be a problem so far. Atsumu is a natural and by then he will be even more skilled, but what worries me a bit are the situations in which we have to deal with several men at the same time. 2-on-1 situations. For example, or even more men. I also need more training in that regard, so I'd like to suggest that we train together as a group of 3 tomorrow morning. You have the most experience and know best what's important. Sakusa shrugged and looked at Komori with a vacant expression. Sure, then there will be 3 of us tomorrow morning. Good. Sakusa stood up and left his hands in his pocket. He walked past his friends, not even glancing at Atsumu. When he was almost out of the room, he raised his hand and spoke. I'm going to catch some sleep. See you tomorrow. Atsumu gulped and looked after Sakusa. You're really rejecting me again. The next morning, Atsumu was already waiting in the training room when Sakusa entered alone. Atsumu had already warmed up and was stretching a bit when he suddenly saw Sakusa and looked at him questioningly. Where is Komori? He'll be a little late, he has something to discuss with Aiko. We should get started, he'll join us then. Atsumu gulped and thought about asking Sakusa about the kiss but figured now wasn't the right time. Hey Omi, can you show me how to grab a knife or gun out of someone's hand without hurting myself? Atsumu looked at the scar on his hand and opened and closed his fingers a few times, then smiled faintly. It didn't work so well last time. Sakusa stiffened a little and looked at Atsumu with wide eyes. He shrugged his shoulders and walked towards Atsumu. Yes, of course. Atsumu grinned broadly at him, which made Sakusa blush a little, but he stifled the smile that wanted to fall across his lips. He showed Atsumu a few tricks and gave him many tips on what to do and what to watch out for, until Sakusa wanted to try it out in a few exercises. He grabbed a toy knife and positioned himself across from Atsumu. Okay, I'm going to attack you now. Atsumu nodded confidently and was focused on Sakusa's hand. Atsumu was a quick learner. He immediately grasped what he had to do and was able to quickly implement what he had learned, but what totally threw him off track was the fact that Sakusa had become many times stronger in the last weeks, no months. Good, I see you've become stronger. Sakusa tried to kick Atsumu in the side, but Atsumu blocked the hit with his forearms. He panted, Sakusa was not an easy opponent. Ha, there are still worlds between us. Atsumu gasped for air. He tried to land a few punches, but Sakusa was just too good. Each hit was blocked almost with an ease. He didn't understand any longer how he was even able to land a few hits back in their fight. Atsumu was brought out of his thoughts with a blow that almost hit his face. He staggered back a few steps and then got back into position. Sakusa looked at him seriously but frowned. Concentrate, if you don't focus 100% on the fight you've already lost. Sakusa got ready for another attack, where he wanted to pretend to stab Atsumu with the knife. However, Sakusa's advice was in the back of Atsumu mind. He was able to dodge it, turning so that his back was to Sakusa and he would stab just past him. He grabbed Sakusa's hand and managed to wrestle the knife away from him. Sakusa grinned mischievously and did not let go of the running movement. The moment Atsumu snatched the knife from him, he grabbed his wrist, spun, and pulled Atsumu over his back with a lot of force, causing them both to fall to the ground. Atsumu landed on his back and Sakusa on top of him, his arms pinned to the ground. Their faces were a few inches apart, which made both Sakusa and Atsumu blush extremely. Both gasping for breath, they looked into each other's eyes. Atsumu's heart was beating faster and faster. He was sure it was going to jump out of his chest at any moment. Sakusa was so close to him, he couldn't even think straight. Atsumu felt the heat spreading through his body, and the longer he looked at Sakusa, the worse this queasy feeling inside him became. "Kiss me." They were both so out of breath, with Sakusa's face so close to his, Atsumu could literally feel Sakusa's breath on his lips. "Please, just kiss me." Atsumu's desire for Sakusa was so strong, it was unbearable. Sakusa's eyes moved from Atsumu's honey-colored eyes down to his lips, ready to reunite with them, when Komori suddenly stumbled into the training room, interrupting whatever they were about to do. "Whoa shit, I didn't mean to disturb you." Sakusa abruptly straightened his upper body and let go of Atsumu's hands, still sitting on top of Atsumu. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and then slowly straightened up, holding out his hand to Atsumu to help him up as well. Atsumu's eyes were wide open, his heart beating so fast it hurt. He swallowed and looked first at Sakusa's hand and then at his face looking down at him. Atsumu was shaking all over, totally overwhelmed by Sakusa. He reached for his hand and then, with his help, straightened up as well, stood still for a moment, and then hurried out of the room. "I'll be right back." Atsumu hurried into the bathroom and immediately locked the door behind him. He leaned back against it and struggled for breath. "Fuck." Atsumu ran to the sink to splash cold water on his face. He needed to come back to his senses. He dried his face, laid the towel back, and then looked at his hand, which was shaking inconceivably. "Shit, Omi, we definitely need to clear this up."